It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, we may be a little bit late uploading this week, and that is because we was at Slam Dunk Festival. We went to the north of the two. This was based around Leeds, and we saw some pretty exciting acts that we've been looking forward to seeing. Main one for you, wasn't it, Pierre, was Boys Like Girls.
Yes.
Boys Like Girls have done a really cool album, Sunday at Foxwoods. I think we have talked about it. I think the first episode of the podcast was actually about it.
That was the main thing I was going to actually mention, was that the very first song we sort of talked about on this podcast was Blood and Sugar by Boys Like Girls. And we finally got the opportunity to see that song live by Boys Like Girls, which was very good. They were exceptionally good with Boys Like Girls. I think all the bands we saw were really, really great. And I think the overall experience of Slam Dunk was something that I really enjoyed, and I'd definitely go again. But it was just really cool to see some of the bands that we've been listening to a lot this year live, especially because in some countries, it can be difficult to see bands that aren't from that country. And UK, we are fortunate, we get a lot of acts. But there was a couple of American bands where it was the first time in the UK for like over a decade. And they're like All American Rejects, Boys Like Girls are two of them. And it was just nice to actually be able to see them without having to, travel across the globe. And I know there was people saying that they'd travelled from Europe to actually see some of the bands on that Slam Dunk. So, sometimes you just got to be glad that it's somewhere near.
Yeah, and it was just, obviously the weather wasn't amazing. That was the main detractor. The weather was not on our side. It was very muddy. But we was prepared. But we was very just happy to see some of the bands live. And what was nice is, because we don't go to a lot of music festivals, we got to see a lot of bands throughout the day. We had an itinerary of seeing Honey Revenge, Against the Current, Boys Like Girls, All American Rejects, and Pale Waves, as well as December Falls. As December Falls was had because they overlapped almost entirely with
Honey Revenge.
So
we did quite well. I think we caught half of their set somehow, and we didn't think we was going to see them at all. So.
We caught 3 full songs, basically, which is, like you say, when they're doing a half an hour set, it's really not too far off half the set. And I suppose when you see the end of the set, you do get like a lot of the songs the bands think is like the showstopper song, because almost every band we saw, the last 2 songs was, like satisfied showstoppers that they was trying to sort of get the crowd to interact with and sing along. And I suppose that the benefit that some of the bands have, particularly like All American Rejects and Boys Like Girls, you really saw this in the crowd. It was like the songs that the crowd knew every single word for, and the songs that like members of the crowd knew, but it's a bit like a song like Mr. Brightside, which actually one of the bands,
We the Kings
played Mr. Brightside, which is a genius idea.
It was we were saying, because I was going to talk a bit about how sequencing of the live sets worked and why, maybe trying to get into why some of the bands made the choices they did. Because it's like a throwback festival, really. Even though a lot of the bands are touring new material, they're sort of trying to tap into that nostalgia of, maybe the early 2000s, or, it isn't so much like, it's not something like Radio 1's Big Weekend where it's showcasing new emerging talent for the most part. Obviously, we know like they had Coldplay on this weekend, who will eventually, hopefully, show us something from Moon Music. But like I say, Slam Dunk, it's trying to get people, on that nostalgia factor initially, and then hoping, like, say like a band like Boys Like Girls with their new album, which I can only recommend like to everybody, which I do recommend to everybody, to be honest. They're hoping that people will go in there, go in there for Love Drunk and The Great Escape, but then maybe be enticed by songs like Blood and Sugar and Miracle. And hopefully, for them, people might catch up to where they are now and actually go, well, I really liked them in the past, but maybe I should check out what they're doing now. And I really hope a lot of people do that, because I feel like, some of the sets, some of the bands on the bill I was unfamiliar with, or like say like All American Rejects, we'd really liked them in the past, but we never really got into them, and it was a really good excuse to dive into their back catalogue and also see some of their newer songs, which I didn't even realise they was releasing songs like up till 2020, and I'm presuming that they are not against releasing more music.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Although they do, they definitely seem like they're not gearing up to do an album. It looks like they're just doing individual songs when they please, which is actually an interesting take from bands like that, because I've found like people have kept saying the CD is dead, the album is dead, it's going to be about singles, but the vast majority of artists you'll see live tend to be touring an album, because why on earth would they go on tour to promote one single? You know, even if that single is a rollout into an album, it's very rare. Like even with bands like All American Rejects, when you look on Spotify, they've just got like 3 or 4 singles, haven't they? Just 3 or 4 random
just got
singles.
Like little dotted releases every so often that I suppose if you've been a long term fan, it's like, oh, they've got a new song out, you know, just frequent enough, like so you don't like lose all hope. And I think that's a really nice, you know, sort of thing to do for their audience, you know, because they've never, like, as far as I've seen, they're not the sort of band that have disbanded. Like Boys Like Girls, sort of, I don't know how official their disbandment was, but they was not a thing really for 10 years. And then or just over 10 years, and then they reformed recently. So that's been very interesting. And then we have bands like You Me at 6 as well, like going into, I don't want to say retirement, but, you know, sort of breaking up and then trying to give their fans like sort of a window of time to actually cope with the fact that they've announced that they're breaking up, you know, because I think it's hard really, because some bands don't, well, I suppose a lot of them do realise how much they affect the fans, but, you know, fans, if you're a big fan of a band, and I think Oasis is the sort of band that comes to mind for a lot of people, and the band just splits up, it can be very, very sad for like the fans, and it can be like emotionally quite a lot, because you just think, well, I'd get so much joy if you could just get in a room and put out some songs or go on tour, but you know, it's not necessarily that simple for some bands.
And I also think, like, I think what's really difficult if you're an Oasis fan is the fact that they keep dancing around the idea of a reunion and getting people's hopes up, sort of teasing it. You even have lots of like people who know them sort of speculating, and there's always that speculation of, will they do a reunion? Will they not? Well, they seem to flip-flop every time they get interviewed. Different ones, sometimes Noel wants to, then sometimes Liam wants to, sometimes neither of them do, but they never both want to at the same time.
Yeah, so I think doing what You Me at 6 are doing, I can see why they've approached it like that, because they get to have a really nice send-off, but then they've also, you know, they've given their fans time to, if they want to go see him.
His big point was, the frontman of You Me at 6, when I read an interview, was he wanted them to end the band amicably. You know what I'm trying to say? Amicably. And he also said he didn't want them to be going round touring when they wasn't at like their best, because I think a lot of people, and I don't want to say Motley Crue or anybody, but they're definitely names that get thrown around when people say about like when they're just not in it to win it, and they're not organised, or like 2 of the members maybe want to do it, and then 2 of the members are like, I'll do it for the money, and it's just unorganised. I think what he was saying is he doesn't want them to be in a position some of his favourite bands are, where they're doing a reunion tour but they're a bit out of it, or, you know, like the, you know, as we've seen, like some of the bands are well equipped and rehearsed, some of the bands struggle through it. Like even on the Bon Jovi documentary, John Bon Jovi's, he is gauging, can he do this? Like, can he actually sing these songs live? And, you know, the mental and physical toll it takes on his body. And I suppose if you're, say, like a singer from a band a lot younger than Bon Jovi, you're going, do I want to be Bon Jovi in 20, 30 years' time? Or do I want to be, you know, like, you know, doing something different?
Yeah, and I think the Bon Jovi one, I mean, we've only seen the first part, but it's very humanising of Bon Jovi, and I think there was a lot of people who was commenting on his vocal sort of ability and stuff. So it's I think it's really refreshing for him to do such a deep dive and address it, like in such a direct manner, because I think, if anything, it makes him a lot more likable. Because I think, a lot of people in his position would not address that he's having issues and that he's having to work so hard. So the fact that he's like owned up to it, but he said, like his reasons for wanting, he still wants to give people the best show possible. And, that's a really tough thing. And I think the thing a lot of people forget as well is just how many people John Bon Jovi is going to let down in his like road crew and band and sort of like career family if he says, you know what, this is it. Because there's so many people waiting on these mega bands. It's not like he's going to take a pay cut. It's like him and everybody he knows is going to, lose out on basically their entire livelihood. I think that's why they feel so pressured to actually get out there and, be the best they can be.
One thing that really surprised me about Slam Dunk Festival was the level of ability from a lot of the bands we saw. Almost every band we went to see had powerhouse vocalists that sounded fantastic. Like,
yeah, they did.
I don't think there was one band we saw. Some people go, "Ooh, it's a bit iffy live," or "Ooh, they're not as good as they are on the record." I think almost every band we saw. I'm actually struggling to think of a single song where any of the singers were struggling.
Yeah,
it just seemed like
where
there was
the band couldn't play the parts very well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was very, very well done with a lot of the bands, and a lot of the parts were very, very technically challenging as well. And I like to go back to Boys Like Girls. I mean, the songs are so well crafted across the board. I don't know how they can perform them songs live. The actual skill must be so high.
Yeah, and like a lot of the bands, they did have just very, very good vocalists. And like on the newer side of the bands, like Against the Current and Honey Revenge were very, very good live. Like, and Against the Current had a lot of technical issues on the start of their set. They powered through it, and it was very, very good. That is surprising, because sometimes when it's a band you've not seen before, you don't know how to gauge how good they're going to be against the record, because a lot of people, they have the record, the touring. But I do think now, particularly for some of the younger bands, they know that they need to sound basically the same as the record when they play live,
Which is because the way production is now, let's go back to Bon Jovi. Bon Jovi, as they say, on the story, just to use it as a really brief example, he cut Runaway by himself, essentially. And, he had to sing that thing, and they got it, mixed. I think there's actually the original demo version is on a new version, like one of the re-releases of the original album, and that got playlist on radio, and that's fine. But, a lot of the new productions, they do a lot of, trickery and a lot of correction and all this stuff. And the tools are so advanced now, like you can really go in there and make things sound ultra, ultra perfect, but also ultra wide and ultra big. Do you know what I mean? And if you're a guitar player going out and, you've quadruple tracked something and somebody's EQ'd it to perfection and they've got like all this production that makes things sound so big and heavy, like a lot of the actual, like the rock bands and the hardcore bands and the bands that are also using these electronic elements, to take that out live. And it is understood that I think a lot of the bands had tracks for the ear candy and to help them out in places, which I think is basically expected now, because if you went out there with like a Fender amp and a drum kit and a mic, you would not sound like the same band, because that the productions are so extravagant. You wouldn't even be able to, you wouldn't be able to pull the same sort of arrangements off, would you, really?
And I definitely think that goes for, like, the heavier bands seem to need a little bit more reinforcement from what I've seen. Now, yeah, there will be bands that don't have any reinforcement and don't play to a click, and you will see that. But I think for the most part, because of use of like trap hats, even in like a lot of the metal acts, there was a lot of like very electronic drum production, because that does sound heavier than a normal drum kit,
And the amount of times I heard like the sub boom, like the like a 808 style kick that just drops in pitch.
Yeah, or like an impact, a riser,
Yeah.
just little things that, a lot of people won't even think about them live. Like if you're not in that production mindset, you're not even going to think about why there's a boom. You're going to think, oh, well, maybe somebody in the band's hit something and it's gone, ooh.
I actually saw in Boys Like Girls set, he stood on something and triggered one of the impacts.
Oh, did you?
In one of the songs. So, it's not to say that everything's on tracks, because that's not necessarily true. But, a lot of people had the Roland trigger pads. I saw a couple of the bands on the Kerrang stage had the trigger pads for trap triggering and for electronic drum parts. And so the bands are very, very production savvy on how
like
to play that live.
People go, oh, I can't believe they're using tracks. Like, if you've ever tried synchronizing a loop off a Roland drum pad whilst playing your actual drum kit, that is very hard to do. I would argue to anybody that actually trying to keep in time whilst triggering loops, it's a bit like Jason Status' drummer when you was watching him at Big Weekend. It's like, to actually do that to that level and trigger everything in real time, you need like a spreadsheet in your mind to go, well, this triggers on this pad and this drum rolls on that pad, and if I want to do a hi-hat quartet, or like trap hats, you've got to, hit this pad at this time to then trigger that. And then sometimes they'll trigger stuff at the start of a bar that you won't hear in the audience until later.
Because it might be a reverse cymbal or like a swell.
And it's adjusting your mind to that way of playing. And I think it's so impressive when you see some of these people do that style. And, I think to a level it is easier just to have a backing track that you play to with a click that has a lot of that stuff that you'd be trying to trigger live. It's easier just to let it all be part of the time code and then just play over it. Then, the drummers who don't play to they will play to a metronome if they're using loops, but the ones that go out with no backing tracking, right, I'll just trigger all this stuff in real time.
It gives you a hell of a lot of stuff to do on drums, and considering how drums is so difficult really live anyway, to have to be like essentially the arranger, because you're, like they say with the Roland pads, you could have every different section. So if somebody says one more chorus, the drummer could be like, right, well, let's re-trigger the chorus again instead of hitting the outro. And that the discipline and just the coordination to be able to do that, I think, without missing a beat is actually insane. But like you were saying, that the actual audio production game for Slam Dunk was very, very good, especially from the bands, because it's not easy trying to bring these, songs that are recorded like in the modern era. It's hard trying to do them live without losing like the third dimension, if you will. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I think sometimes live music can sometimes feel like flat, dependent on what's going on stage. Like sometimes, and you always find this when there's no light show. Obviously, the vast majority of the bands were playing in daylight. The lights do a lot. They do a lot to your subconscious when you're watching a band and to the atmosphere. And when you're playing in just daylight and there's not a load of stuff going on stage and you've just got like a static banner behind you, you have to just carry it with the music. But I think atmosphere wise, a lot is, and this is the reason why every band plays at night and they play it with loads of lights and fog and smoke and strobes, is because that does a lot to the perception for the audience of a moment or a mood that they're trying to create on stage. When you don't have that, or when you've got some lights but they're like, you can see the lights are on but they're not really doing a lot because it's daylight, it does for me, I would say it detracts on the stage show aspect, but never for what the band is doing. It's more like from an audience point of view, you don't feel like you're getting as much of a show. And this is why I always feel sorry for support bands, like on any gig, because support bands just seem to go out, like sometimes they have a little bit, sometimes they have nothing but a curtain behind them. And they're just expected to go out, even though that nobody's really come to see them specifically, or maybe like a marginal, depending on how big they are. Like a minority of the crowd might have come to see them specifically, which is even worse, because if you go to see a support act and you're excited to see them and it feels like the crowd don't care, that can be worse sometimes than just not seeing them at all.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough whenever you're put in a scenario where you feel like the band you wanted to see isn't being received well, and especially if it's for a reason like it's just not a great support slot. Like the support band doesn't fit the event or the main band's sort of like audience or demographic. So I know what you mean, Mark. It's like you don't want to go see your favourite band and leave like disappointed because of a circumstance that wasn't to do with you or the band. You know, that seems like a real shame.
I mean, atmosphere plays into all gigs, and like say you could see, I mean, I was very much flabbergasted by All American Rejects because I know a fair few. I'm not a massive super fan, so I don't know every song back to back, but I know a lot of the hits by All American Rejects. And the first, after Swing Swing, the next 4 songs, I felt like I didn't have a clue. I just didn't know what songs there was. And it felt to me like not necessarily all the crowd, but a majority of the crowd was sort of like just watching.
Waiting on the hits again.
Waiting for like a hit. And that's not to detract from their playing. They was great on stage and it was very funny and charismatic was the singer. A lot more crowd interaction from him than I thought he was going to do. I thought there was going to be a little bit more like, let's play through the songs. I don't know why, but he was very wacky on stage. I think the full band was.
Very, very funny. Probably one of the funniest acts I've seen, and I say that as a compliment because it was all about, like you said, the crowd interaction and the banter.
But I was expecting to hear the staple tracks, and I actually realised after they didn't play a lot of the singles and a lot of the songs that have music videos. They didn't play Beekeeper's Daughter. You know, they didn't play Top of the World, which was one of my favourite songs off the first album. Luckily for me, they played some of the songs I wanted to hear. They played Kids in the Street, and that was the only song off that album that they played. And I'm glad because that was one of the songs I was really hoping they would play because I've always liked that track.
But obviously, the end half of the set was wall-to-wall hits
to
the point where the crowd was pretty much whipped up into a frenzy, to their credit.
Yeah.
Because
they had 3 or 4 tracks in a row where everybody knew every word.
Yeah, and that's probably, they probably can do that knowing that the tracks like Gives You Hell and Move Along and Dirty Little Secret are all just people, they're just ingrained. If you're a certain age, they are ingrained into your heads. So, like I say, very impressed. And like whilst we're talking about sequencing, which we was going to talk about, Boys Like Girls set was sequenced in such a crazy manner. We had we'd seen the Veeps live stream of one of their gigs, so we had a little taster of what they was going to do. But just the way that they, we didn't actually get any proper medleys apart from when they went from The Great Escape into Love Drunk for the second time. Like right as the key change happens on The Great Escape, they hit you with another chorus of Love Drunk, which I don't know why that works so well. It's like perfection.
Is they tease Love Drunk at the start of the set, don't they?
Well, they play the full song.
No, but what I mean is that they do it because you're not ready. Like, in that sense, a lot of people maybe aren't ready to sing along. Some people, like, particularly if you've seen them by themselves.
Yeah, you're not warmed up.
You're not warmed up. And then they bring Love Drunk back, and then everybody in the crowd singing Love Drunk at the end. Like, because they've just been singing every word to The Great Escape. So you're in that, the crowd are in the headspace to sing every word. So then when it goes to a song like Love Drunk, they just...
You were saying that's why you thought... We the Kings played Mr. Brightside.
Yeah, they played it right before Check Yes, Juliet.
Yeah, so everybody was just in the zone, and then they're like, here's our biggest hit, and everybody just went nuts. I mean, we were stood quite far back for them. We was sort of in the in-betweens, but we actually stopped what we was doing and started watching the set because when they was playing Mr. Brightside and stuff, the crowd was in an absolute frenzy, it looked like to us.
And you could hear the crowd, and we was on a hill looking down at the crowd, and you could hear the crowd, and the singer was like, I can't hear you, and we was thinking, well, we can hear them all the way over here, so it must have been damn loud in the crowd. But yeah, it was very, very impressive, and like I said, just really nice, because I think there's always a worry when you're at a festival that some of the bands aren't going to be on, because they're playing at funny times or having to work around a lot. You also have like just the nature of festivals, it's not dedicated towards each band. So
and if there's a hiccup, you lose a song. And that's the thing. Like with Against the Current, they had technical problems, and we could tell we'd lost a song somewhere from the set, which is not necessarily their fault, but there's not a lot of wiggle room. They can't just They can't just have an hour delay in a festival. And we've actually been at a festival where there was a 3-hour delay, and it does not end well for everybody.
Yeah. Because they started Silent Stranger, did Against the Current, and they had to stop in the first quarter of the song, really. Just after the intro, just after the drums kicked in. And then they had to... when they eventually sorted out the tech difficulties... because the mic was cutting out all the time. You know, the singer was trying to... I think her name's Chrissy Costanza.
Yeah.
If I got that right.
I think it's Chrissy.
So she was trying to talk to the crowd to try and not make it so there was just nothing happening on stage. But her mic kept cutting out every time she was mid-sentence.
Yeah.
And you could see her getting really agitated because they're trying to make the best of it. And obviously not to their fault, really. They'd just been done in. I felt like they were set up to fail, you know. And then there was Fantastic when they started, because they started with Good Guy. That's how we know that we lost Silent Stranger, because they started that and then it went, right, we're going to start playing again. And you hear a different riff to a different song and go, oh, we've just lost that first song completely.
But like you say, I think a lot of bands in their situation would have... I would not be surprised if there was bands that would have just been like...
Walked off stage.
We tried, but we're going now. I really do think people would have done that. I mean, the problem that they had is they like sort of had to be the face of the problem. And it's, you know, you feel for them because I think they said that they had a new crew or something, and it's a festival, so it's double like exasperation because all the turnarounds are really quick. So I think there was just... trying to survive that festival. But like I say, once they actually could play, and it wasn't that long there was waiting, and luckily...
It was probably about 3 minutes in the crowd, something to the tune of that.
When they played, they were, like you say, Mike, they were fantastic, and it was a really good show, and I think they would have been that energetic anyway, but I would have thought after all that issue at the start, there was mega energetic to try and make up for any lost time.
But yeah, it was just really impressive. There was only 2 bands that we saw in the full thing that we'd seen before. We'd seen As December Falls once, and we'd seen Pale Waves a bunch of times. So, you know, we knew Pale Waves was going to be good. But they debuted a new song as well, which was quite nice to see.
I'm looking forward to seeing that, because I know they're teasing a lot of stuff on Instagram as well. So I'm intrigued to see what Pale Waves are up to, because I think all 3 of their albums have been really, really good so far.
And it was also an eye-opener because there's a few acts we never heard before that we saw. A few really heavy acts. There was one of the stages had like flutes and saxophones and lots of ska music on.
Yeah, very ska.
Not for me, but I did enjoy hearing it I didn't know any of the bands on either on that stage. But it was very entertaining to walk by and see. We was just happy that, one, the festival never got cancelled because it was raining and it was torrential, but we got to see all the bands we was after seeing, which was really nice.
The sun eventually came out as well, which was nice.
And we caught everything we wanted to catch, so we was just very happy overall, because when you're in that adverse like weather conditions and you're just like, oh no, it's all going wrong, a car parking's been cancelled, you're thinking, oh no, it's all going to go bad. And I'm just glad that, you know, the festival organisers pulled it off, basically.
I'm glad that they didn't, because they could have easily looked at the top of the day, and I think a weaker organisation with maybe more money to spare, like a bigger organisation, because I believe they're quite a small, for a festival like that size and that scale, I think they're quite a small organisation. Other people might have pulled the plug on that festival just based off the morning, because it was so wet and there were so many issues regarding the actual weather conditions. But, you know, everybody went on, and maybe some people slipped in the mud and couldn't get parked. Great, but otherwise it was what it was supposed to be, a music festival. And I think, you know, I'm glad they pulled it off, because I think there will have been a lot of people in our positions where you've been waiting a long time to see a band that ain't coming round again for a while. You know, this is their only UK date this year. And if they would have cancelled, it would have been like, well, you know, I've been looking forward to that for 6 months, and now
what would you rather have? The experience of seeing a band that you may not ever get the chance to see live, or you 100 quid back, you know?
Yeah, it's not that much really, is it, to gamble?
Yeah, not when you've already spent it.
Yeah.
But that was just our thoughts on Slam Dunk, and just saying about what acts we enjoyed. And like I say, I would thoroughly recommend to check any of the bands out, particularly if you like pop punk or
Emo,
alt rock, emo,
metal.
just rock in general, to be honest. But very, very, very good bands that we've discovered and then got the chance to see live. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we will be back with our regular programming next week.
And let us know in the comments if you frequent Slam Dunk Festival or what your local festival scene is like.